By the time the last thread of daylight left the meadow, the longhouse already held the slow exhale of night. Come closer, and let me tell you what it smells like. The air is heavy with a mix of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint sweetness of hay trampled beneath the animal's hooves. You would notice it as soon as you stepped inside, your eyes blinking against the dimness, your chest filling with the thick, almost oily smoke that clings to the rafters. My hair carries it too. Every braid, every loose strand is perfumed by the fire's breath. The door creaks shut behind you, sealing out the last cold light of the evening, and the world narrows to this one space. This long, timbered belly of wood and earth where life is lived shoulder to shoulder. I bend to draw water from the pail, and the handle bites cold against my palm. The water is not fresh, only what was hauled from the stream before the dusk. But it is what we have. The hearth crackles, but not warmly enough to reach the corners where the air grows sharper, almost icy. I can see my breath in that dim edge of the room, white in the dark, before it vanishes like a ghost into the beams. Around me the animals stir. A low cough from the goats, a soft shuffle of hooves as they settle into straw beds. They are family too, not only because they feed us but because their warmth pushes back against the night. The rafters above are black with years of smoke, every beam layered in soot so thick it swallows light. They seem to lean down with the weight of it, as though pressing the house into silence. You may imagine a hall filled with laughter, the Viking feasts that sagas praise, but that belongs to the wealthy few. Here, in this humbler longhouse, there is little feast, only the dry crack of kindling and the shuffle of tired bodies finding their place for the night. I feel the ache of the cold gathering near the door, creeping in like a quiet thief, reminding us that one careless ember or draught might steal our sleep. I stand for a moment longer, listening. The hush is never empty. There are always small sounds. The drip of water somewhere, the whine of wind working its way through the thatch, a child murmuring in sleep. And beneath it, the tension that never fully lifts, the waiting for a footstep, a hand at the latch. Trouble or comfort, you never know which will come through the door. Every household has its unspoken fears, and night sharpens them. The dark makes every sound larger, every silence longer. Do you feel that unease, even here, sitting safe in your own room? It is something our ancestors lived with always. Still, I settle by the hearth, spreading out my work. A piece of wool to mend, thread wound tight on a bone spindle. The fire is more than heat. It is company. Its glow washes the rough benches, softens the shadows, makes the longhouse bearable. I draw the wool close to the light and think of the small labors that keep us alive. Tonight will be like so many others. Tending the embers, watching the door, soothing a restless child. Nothing extraordinary, and yet survival itself is extraordinary when each night brings 100 small risks. We will walk through them together. Tonight, I will show you the longhouse not as legend but as it was lived. Smoky, crowded, sometimes cruel, yet also tender in its own fragile way. You will learn where we sleep, how we keep warm, what we eat when hunger presses, and what dangers creep in when the world goes still. I promise to be plain with you, not to make it harsher than it was, but not softer either. My voice will be steady, so you may rest while listening. But behind my words lies the truth of what it meant to live and breathe in a place where comfort was always uncertain. If you're enjoying this calm walk into the past, tap subscribe or leave a quiet comment about what image surprised you so far. Perhaps it was the smoke or the goats, or the ache of cold pressing against the door. And so, as the night deepens, let me guide you further into this world. We will step slowly, gently, through each layer of life within these walls. The hearth, the beds, the food, the illness, the whispers of violence, and the tiny comforts that stitch people together in the dark. For tonight, we are guests in this longhouse, breathing its smoke, sharing its silence, and learning why a single night here was never easy to survive. The rafters record generations, the dark smoke like a slow diary, and every bench has a story of who was allowed to sit closest to the flame. The house itself is long and low, its walls of timber and turf pressed together like clenched fists against the wind. From the outside, it looks almost like part of the earth, a ridge grown from soil and grass, but inside it stretches in one dim, crowded sweep. There is no division of rooms, no doors to shut one space from another. The longhouse is one body, one breath, everything stitched together by the central fire. And in that body, every place you stand or sit tells the truth of who you are. The hearth lies at the center, dug shallow into the floor, glowing with embers that never fully die. I spend much of my day circling it, stirring, mending, or simply keeping watch. The smoke is thick and constant, never escaping fully through the small hole above, but gathering in the beams until it turns the air hazy and bitter. It sinks into my hair, my wool, my skin, so that I carry the house wherever I go. Even when I step into the meadow, the smell of smoke clings like a second garment. Resin from the wood gives it a sharpness, while peat and dung add their earthy sting. At first it burns your eyes, but soon the sting becomes ordinary, and you notice instead the way your tongue tastes faintly of ash. The floor is beaten earth, uneven beneath bare soles. It is damp in spring, dusty in summer, frozen in winter. Straw is scattered to soften the tread, but it quickly gathers muck, scraps of wool, bits of bone, grease from cooking. Near the benches where we sit to work or rest, it grows slick, and I must sweep often with a stiff broom of twigs. Still, nothing ever stays clean for long. This is a house of labor, not polish. The air is busy with the scent of churned butter, sour milk, and the iron tang of tools. Some evenings, when animals are restless, I catch the musk of their hides stronger than the fire's warmth. Goats, sheep, and sometimes cattle share our roof, their breath steaming in the dimness, their presence both comfort and burden. Without them, the cold would creep deeper, yet with them, disease lingers near. The benches run along the walls, raised slightly above the floor. Here, people sit by day and lie by night, their cloaks spread as bedding. But not every bench is equal. Those nearest the hearth belong to the elders, the head of the household, or the honored guest. Here, warmth is strongest, light is brightest, and conversation is easiest. I sit further down, mending hems or churning cream, where the fire's glow is softer, my face half in shadow. Beyond me, toward the door, the benches are colder, the smoke harsher. Servants sleep there, and strangers too when they are allowed inside. Their place is marked by distance, their breath misting white while the rest of us doze in relative warmth. You can read a family's order simply by walking the line of benches. Power and kinship closest to the fire, invisibility pressed against the dark. When I lay out bedding, I feel this order with my own hands. The hides are thicker near the hearth, the straw fresher. Further away, bedding grows thinner, the straw flattened and damp. I tuck my child between myself and the wall, so the draft will not touch her skin, though I know it always finds its way. Sometimes, when the wind is harsh, the cold at the door bites as sharply as a knife. I glance often at those who must sleep there and wonder how they endure. Perhaps they do not. Not all strangers survive the nights of winter. Still, we share what little space we have, though generosity and necessity blur. The rafters creak overhead, blackened with soot, storing decades of meals and winters in their grain. They drip tar and resin when heat rises, leaving sticky beads on benches, hair, and clothes. I wipe them away with a sigh, knowing they will return. Yet even these rafters carry memory. Each layer of smoke marks years of living, years of children born, seasons harvested, kin buried. They are the diary of the house, though no ink touches them. If you could climb up there, you might trace the years with your fingers, feeling history as a slow sediment of fire. Every task I do teaches me the house's social map. Churning butter near the hearth, I feel the authority in the nearness of elders' voices. Sweeping straw toward the door, I glimpse how easily those on the margins are forgotten. Even fetching a cup of water, I must weave between bodies placed by hierarchy as much as by need. Proximity is power. Warmth is status. To sit near the flame is to be counted. To sleep by the door is to fade into smoke. And so the longhouse is more than shelter. It is a mirror of the household's bonds, its silences, its tensions. It shows who is seen and who is left in shadow. You may think of walls as protection, but here they also divide without partition. One roof holds us all, yet the nearness of fire or the sting of cold quietly measures our worth. I sometimes wonder, as I mend by the half-light, whether the house itself judges us. The rafters watching, the beams listening, the hearth deciding who will rise strong and who will be forgotten in the draft. If you could ask a Longhouse woman one question, what would it be? Drop a line below. Perhaps you would ask about the smoke, or the cold, or how she kept her place on the bench. The small ceremony of tending embers becomes the household's heartbeat. When it falters, everyone notices. By dusk I find myself moving in a circle I barely remember learning. The hearth sets the rhythm of the day. Its light decides what work remains. I take up the spindle and let it turn between my fingers, the wool whispering as it narrows, and the motion steadies me as a slow prayer. Nearby the pot hisses, a thin stew simmering to its last flavor. My hands move in a choreography honed by seasons. Darning thinning sleeves, scraping a pan, rolling dough, and stirring embers to a hush. Labor is the lullaby of this house. We speak less while we work. The scrape of the quern and the click of bone tools are as much conversation as words. Men may walk back from fields or the shore, but after the outside chores are done, the Longhouse becomes a workshop of women's tasks. We grind grain until the stone hums. We churn until butter separates and our palms complain. We spin and knit and mend while the smoke draws ever darker lines across the beams. The repetition is intimate, a way to know the household by touch and sound, to map who needs what before any voice says it. There is memory in each motion. A mended cuff tells me who has worn a coat too rough. The way a hearthstone glows reveals how often a pot has boiled. In that detail lives gossip and guidance. Stories slip between stitches. A neighbor's new child, a trader's strange bargain, who brought meat at harvest and who did not. Such talk is soft and practical. It keeps us woven into a larger web. It reminds us who can be trusted with milk, who must be watched for borrowed grain, and who will answer a call in the dead of night. Not all chores quiet the mind. Some pull sharp focus. An infant's cry will unravel my stitch quicker than any thought, and a sudden cough by the bench makes every hand tense. When illness comes, the hearth becomes a place of urgent work. Steaming herbs over the pot, warming stones, binding wounds. A calm hand on a fevered brow, the careful pressing of a poultice. These are crafts as much as comfort. The noises that usually soothe, rain on thatch, the steady scrape of broom, can become alarms when a life leans toward danger or when a weak breath is all that lies between us and loss. Labor also draws the map of power. The house arranges us by work and rank. Elders hold the warmest benches and the most honored bowls. Those who owe service sleep nearer the door. I can read the family's order by the way benches are warmed and by which hands reach first for spoons. Tasks carry status. The woman who tends the pot for a guest performs an act of honor. The servant sent to fetch water in snow learns a particular exhaustion. Proximity to heat is not only comfort. It is a small measurement of worth. Tending embers is both art and calculation. Too little heat invites damp and sickness. Too much wastes the peat we saved for worse weather. I shift coals with a practiced hand, bank the blaze for the night, and set a forgiving coal where a child might tuck beneath a blanket. I scrape soot from the pan so the stew will not taste bitter. I set aside a charred scrap for tinder, knowing that tomorrow's small flame may depend on it. Each choice is invisible to those who have never had the weight of household thrift on their palms, but every move is part of a careful arithmetic of survival. The hands that work here are worn, but they are also skilled and knowing. When I wring wool and watch the fat roll off, I know how to coax more butter from milk. When I stitch, I make seams that will hold through winter. There is dignity in these calluses, a quiet pride that needs no songs. Our labor is uncelebrated in tales of kings, but it keeps the Longhouse whole. Without it, the morning would find us colder, hungrier, rawer at the edges. Work shapes sleep as much as it shapes the day. Beds are earned, not simply chosen. Those who have labored closest to the hearth through daylight tend to lie closer by night. Lean bodies sleep differently from those who did less. A mother nursing at the bench wakes often, handing blankets and listening for small breaths. A laborer who shuffled wood all day may sleep through a thin cold until hunger wakes him. There are nights that demand wakefulness. A storm that tears the thatch, a herd startled by wolves, and then all hands must move without lullaby. Stillness by the embers carries a lullaby quality. The rhythm of hands, the slow turning of the quern, the steady spin of the spindle. These sounds fold into the longhouse and make a kind of domestic music. It is not sweet, but it is steady, a tempo that says, "We will do this again tomorrow." I sit and feel the rhythm in my bones, and I understand why these tasks become the language of our nights. Repetition writes a map of safety in a world that offers little steadiness. If this gentle history is helping you unwind, consider subscribing to more episodes like this, and tell me which small task you found most compelling. When dawn finally arrives, it finds the house stitched into a hole by those hands. Pots cleaned, bedding shifted, coals banked for later. Labor as lullaby brings us through the night. In the smallest motions, the stitch, the churn, the careful tending of embers, people are kept from the edge. That steady work is not glamorous, but it is very nearly sacred. It is how we sleep at all. I watch the slow breathing of the house, the small rises and falls like a chorus of lanterns. In that chorus I hear proof of our lives. Steady, necessary work that keeps us warm and always remembers us at morning. You press the wool close and feel its heat, but you also feel the risk, and the longhouse's closeness can be both shelter and threat. I lay out the bedding by habit, like drawing a small map that will hold us through a night. Hides go where the draft stabs. Straw comes next to soften the earth. Patched wool cloaks fold into rough pillows. The smell is constant. Lanolin warmed to sweetness, the damp of straw, the sour edge of day's sweat, and the ever-present dust of smoke that sinks into every fold. When I pat the blankets for my child, I notice the history written there. A darker patch where a heel pressed, a seam mended to stop the wind, the faded gloss of well-worn cloth where a handful of years has smoothed it. Those marks tell me who has slept here before and how the house was used, and they shape how I tuck a blanket around a small body. We sleep close because warmth is a bargaining chip. Bodies pressed together keep the cold from stealing heat. A child tucked between two adults wakes less often. Placing a tethered goat at the feet gives hours of borrowed warmth. But that nearness brings other exchanges. Lice travel hair to hair when braids are loose. Sweat collects and soaks the straw, inviting damp that the cold will seize. I check my child's scalp with a practiced hand, parting braids, combing with a small bone comb, rubbing herbs into the hair to discourage pests, tricks learned from mothers before us. Seasons rewrite our beds. In autumn we stitch on extra wool and lay denser hides. In spring we hang bedding on low hills to drink the sun, shaking rot and smoke into open air. Those Sundays are celebrations. Everything smells cleaner afterward, and children roll in the fresh smells as if in forgiveness. But in deep winter airing is impossible. Frost and wind pin us close, and the straw compresses, freeing moisture back into cloth and skin. Condensation forms on thatch and trickles in cold beads that pool near bare feet. That dampness invites mold, and the quiet growth of illness begins in places you cannot see. We keep animals inside because heat is costly. A single goat tethered in the corner, its breath steaming, can mean the difference between fingers that numb and flesh that stays workable by morning. Their hide bristles into our bedding. Sometimes scales of hair or drops of dung find their way between blankets. These comforts have a price. Parasites transfer, and waste left near bedding becomes a small threat of infection. On the worst nights, I lie awake listening to an animal's chest heave, timing my own breath with its rise and fall and measuring my sleep by that steady sound. Crowding is a slow hazard. When more bodies share a single roof, air thickens with carbon and moisture. Smoke that climbs to the rafters does not disappear. It weighs down and returns in breaths that fill the room. Over years, soot darkens lungs. Sometimes a banked fire flares and smoke slides low, filling the space where we sleep. A house full of smoke can make breathing a labor and sleep a dangerous surrender. Mothers keep vigil for shallow breaths and coughs. One cough in the dark can become an evening's alarm that starts urgent hands toward the source. Illness moves quickly through closeness. A fever spreads like rumor, touching one body and then another. A small wound that would have healed on dry straw festers when bedding is damp and help is slow to come. Children weakened by scant food or early weaning cannot fend off infections as adults might. I have watched a single cold night push a lively child toward a decline that no midwife could fully mend. It is a sharp thing to carry. The memory that one missed fire, one wet bed, can begin a chain that unravels over weeks. There is frostbite's particular cruelty. A toe goes numb, then burns into a pain that wakes a sleeper like a slap. I tuck spare cloaks and mittens into a child's bedding because I have felt cold bite small bones. We learn to balance layers. Too tight and sweat soaks the skin. Too loose and the draft finds its way. In nights that swing between mild and biting, this balancing act repeats in the dark, shifting shawls and loosening wraps without waking those who sleep. Still, tenderness threads through the risk. A mother's body is a furnace and a blanket. She will trade her warmth without thought. Hands find each other by habit, smoothing a braid, rubbing a damp back, a whispered line from an old lullaby. Small economies of care exist. A hidden bowl of broth passed under blankets, a finger laid on a child's throat to count breath, a sister waking to share a bench when one coughs. These acts are practical and human, ways we resist the night's dangers. We do what we can to lessen peril. Airing bedding when sun allows, scraping straw clean, sweeping dung from the sleeping area, and keeping infants nearest the hearth. We save the cleanest hides for those most in need, patching what we can rather than discarding it. Yet each night forces an arithmetic. Warmth versus cleanliness, closeness versus contagion. Sometimes weather decides. Sometimes the presence of a stranger or the absence of a kin determines who gets the warmest spot. Night forces small moral calculations about who receives the last bowl, who stays by the fire. If you imagine a single night trivial, remember for us it was an event measured in breaths and coals. A night could be the fulcrum between health and lasting harm. You close a door and sleep safely. We close no doors and must choose how to share what little heat we have. Knowing the cramped, smoky truth of a longhouse night does not make the past cruel for the sake of shock. It makes ordinary bravery visible. Tonight, when you slide beneath your covers, spare a quiet thought for their courage, and share one detail below. How does that change the way we feel about our own comfort now? The pot is more than food. It keeps score of favors, debts, and who will wake hungry tomorrow. By evening our stew is a dark, patient thing. Marrow and root softened into a broth, barley swollen so the bowl feels full, and a single strip of meat stretched into many bites. I stand at the hearth and stir with a wooden spoon worn smooth by seasons, watching steam fold around my face like an old shawl. The smell, warm fat, softened onion, a faint tang of soured milk, settles into my clothing and into the air around the benches. We learn to stretch a pot by practice. Barley and grated turnip thicken the broth, herbs add a bright note, and the choicest pieces are quietly reserved for the ill or the very young. Preservation feels like prophecy. In summer we smoke fish on racks until it hangs like dark ribbons. Pork is salted into barrels and buried where cool earth will slow spoilage. Berries are threaded on strings and dried in the sun. Herbs are braided and hung from beams. Fat is rendered into tallow for lamps and for richer stews in the lean months. I remember summers when my hands were raw from threading fruit and hanging fish, the sun on my back and the smell of smoke a memory stitched into my skin. There is ceremony in dividing the pot. The eldest is offered the first spoon as a small law of respect. A stranger welcomed at the door receives the warmest bowl. The midwife or a woman in labor may be given broth to strengthen her. Rituals keep order when the pot grows thin. Yet scarcity rewrites custom into arithmetic. Who lent seed in spring, who mended a roof, who carried a child. These debts shape who eats first in winter. I once traded half a string of smoked salmon for a bolt of wool that kept my children through a wet autumn. The preserved fish became both sustenance and coin. Hunger changes how people move. I have watched a neighbor's hand hover near a loaf and then withdraw with a flush of shame when eyes found his. I have woken to rough knocks at the door from travelers whose faces were raw and lips split with cold. Letting them in risks our stores. Barring the door risks their lives. On a night when snow sealed the lanes, a man stumbled to our threshold. We warmed him, fed him, and set him to sleep by the hearth. The next week he returned with a small sack of barley. No great gift, but enough to steady a week of worry. The work of preserving knits the household into wider exchange. A barrel of salted fish can buy a knife. A jar of dried fruit might secure a midwife's attendance. Trade links our longhouse to roads and markets beyond the fields we know. Yet when harvests fail or thieves come in the dark, the ledger empties and trust frays. I have heard rumors of men slipping into barns to pry open storehouses. Families woke to emptiness where months of labor had hung. The memory of such theft teaches households to hide jars and to hollow beams where a small portion might be kept unseen. Animals come indoors because their heat is expensive and peat is dearly saved. A tethered goat by the bench breathes warmth into the straw. A cow's flank pressed near a child can keep tiny toes from freezing. Livestock bring work, scraping dung, sweeping clumps of fur from blankets, combing hair for lice, but often their warmth is worth the grime. I pat a goat's flank and feel the steady heat that keeps small bones from becoming sick with cold. That heat is survival, plain and stubborn. Sometimes the night brings the sound of urgent knocks that test both charity and caution. I remember a night when a band of travelers pounded on the door, faces raw from wind and eyes hollow. Bowls were filled with little ceremony, and their gratitude was immediate and rough. After they left, we counted what remained and wondered whether that mercy would mark our house for envy. Sometimes kindness spills back as repayment. Sometimes it simply shows us who walks hardest on the road. Hunger can push some toward theft and others toward unexpected generosity. Neighbors share seed, midwives skip fees, and secret jars move under blankets. Other nights rumor turns toward violence. Stories of empty storehouses draw desperate men like the cold draws crows. Such tales teach households to guard their preserves and to watch the paths. But they also teach us how precious a hidden jar can be when a child is fevered and the throat is thin. If you find these food stories grounding, please tap the like button. It helps more listeners find calm history. After the meal, the work continues. Bones are boiled again to pull a second, weaker broth. Fat is skimmed and stored in small pots. Skins and rinds are packed into earth pits to keep cool. We slide scraps into a hollow beam and call it insurance. We mend nets and baskets to catch more fish. Preservation is a slow devotion, a daily humility that turns scraps into tomorrow's sustenance. When jars are generous, we repay in labor and favors. When jars run low, we remember kindness is owed. Food in the longhouse is comfort and a map of social life. It builds kinship and reveals inequality. The householder may tuck a loaf away for an early ride while the washerwoman eats at the edge. Children relish sudden treats while elders decline extra so others may have enough. These small distributions carve relationships. Gratitude and resentment live together in the passing of bowls. When you lift your spoon tonight, think of the choices one ladle held centuries ago. The favors repaid, the debts remembered, the neighbor warmed or turned away. Let that thought settle like an ember, and sleep with that gentle warmth in your chest this night. A cough at midnight sounds larger in the dark, and the longhouse listens, waiting to see if a life will tilt. Cold is a patience of small things here. A thin seam at the door, thatch worn through where wind has chewed it, boots left damp by the threshold. I wake with stiff fingers and the prick of frost at the knuckles, and in the dim I unwrap a child and rub warmth into small limbs. We wrap and fold, layering wool and hides, loosening seams when a breath grows hot, tightening when frost bites. Clothing is constant repair. Every mend is a calculation about how many more nights we can survive without a new cloak. Illness rides the cold like a shadow. A cough that starts as a tickle can settle deep and steal sleep until breath becomes shallow. We learn to hear danger. A rattling that sits low in the chest, a sudden quickening of pulse, a forehead that feels like a stone against the palm. Toothache sharpens the whole house. A jaw throb makes even the stoic pace nervy. Births come at night, often long and uncertain, and the absence of skilled hands can make the hours stretch toward fear. Our remedies are simple, and their skill lies in knowing when to use them. Willow bark and meadowsweet for fever, crushed plantain or comfort poultices for wounds, warmed wool and oil pressed to a newborn's chest. Steam drawn over heated stones eases labored breathing for some. A poultice of boiled barley may soothe a raw throat. Midwives carry bundles of herbs and soaked cloths, and elders recall which concoctions once steadied a neighbor through a hard spell. These cures help often enough to be trusted, but they fail sometimes, and failure is a quiet, heavy thing. At night, decisions are immediate and small. Do we wake the traveler sleeping on the outer bench because he knows a remedy? Do we bake the last of the bread to feed the fevered child, or save it for a morning when several mouths will wake empty? I have traded blankets for watch shifts, warmth as currency, and I have bartered broth for a night of someone else's vigilance. Care is counted in help and hours. Every act of attention costs fuel and sleep. I remember a night when my youngest's breath began to flutter. I rubbed oil warmed on a stone to her chest, brewed willow bark until it no longer steamed, and pressed warm flints to her feet to draw heat into small limbs. I kept count of breaths, slow as the turning of a quern, until the house shrank to the rhythm of that small body. The cough turned wetter, and every soft noise, the scrape of broom, a goat's shift, felt enormous. I considered whether to wake the healer lodging nearby, whose hands could steady a fevered breath, and weighed the cost of noise against the cost of delay. Community care is the web that makes homes livable. Midwives answer midnight knocks because they remember kinship as practical law. Neighbors trade watches. Elders loan knowledge and sometimes a jar of preserved broth. We teach children how to listen to a breath and how to count it like prayer. Yet communal safety phrase when stores run low. When hunger gnaws and fuel dwindles, the lattice of favor strains and sometimes breaks. Then decisions turn sharper and resentment can shadow kindness. Not all aid is medical. Warm hands and low talk are medicines too. A hum of a mother's song, a cloth dabbed against a fevered brow, broth heated and fed with patient lips. These small attentions steady breath and soothe the thin terror that creeps in the dark. When a midwife arrives, she brings not only herbs but a steadiness. A steadying touch that says, "We know what to do next even if outcome is uncertain." That steadiness sometimes changes the arc of a night. There are limits we learn to live with. A poultice cannot pull deep infection from damp bedding. Willow cannot save every fever that climbs. Acceptance becomes practice. We conserve coals, we teach the smallest comforts early. We stitch knowledge into children's bones. Listening becomes a trained craft, counting breaths, noting the pitch of a cough, seeing the way sleep breaks. The household becomes an arena of constant small triage. Night sharpens ethics. Who will you wake? Who will you warm first? These questions are answered by kinship, by reputation, and sometimes by simple luck. I choose to warm my child before a guest, and in so doing I fold my duty into the Longhouse's pattern. Often that duty is repaid, sometimes not. We learn to carry both gratitude and sorrow as part of the house's weight. When dawn light slips under thatch, we tally the night. A burned wick, an empty pot, a life held through tilt. These are the accounts we keep. Illness teaches humility. It reduces plans to patient attention and reminds us that neighbors are precious. In a world where help is an hour away and the night can widen into long weeks of cold, the small routines of care are the true defenses we have. If you want more grounded medical vignettes from history, mention it below. I'll collect gentle stories for future episodes. And so we move into morning with hands already mending, coals banked, and a watch scheduled for the night ahead. These small attentions, hands warm on fevered skin, slow songs, and shared fire, are how we keep each other. The long night is not only about sleep and waiting for dawn. It is also about people, their tempers, their pride, and the fragile balance that holds us together when we share walls, food, and fire. Inside the Longhouse, every word, every silence, and every gesture carries weight. The dark makes things louder. The cough of a neighbor, the creak of the bench, the sigh of a restless sleeper. But it also magnifies feelings. Jealousy, suspicion, tenderness, or fear. What happens between dusk and morning can shape tomorrow, or even a lifetime. I remember nights when I felt my body stiffen, not from the cold, but from the sound of a drunk man's stumble. His laughter was too sharp, too heavy. When ale loosens the tongue, honor can turn brittle. A joke told in daylight may be shrugged off, but whispered at night, it can spark a quarrel. I learned to keep my child close on such nights, pretending sleep but always listening, always ready to move between danger and safety. The Longhouse holds many kinds of silence. There is the silence of contentment, when bellies are warm and the stories flow. And there is the silence after harsh words, when no one dares stir the embers, afraid that the crackle of a log might restart the fight. In those hours, you learn how thin the barrier is between kinship and conflict. We rely on small customs to keep order. If a man feels insulted, he may demand an oath by firelight, a promise sworn before kin. If that promise holds, peace is restored, and the house breathes again. But if it breaks, blood may follow. We have no walls of stone between us, no guards at our door. The household itself must decide how to shelter, how to punish, and how to forgive. Sometimes the dangers are quiet, not loud. A whispered accusation in the dark can poison a family more surely than a blade. Someone says a girl looked too long at another man. Someone else mutters about hoarded food or broken trust. You lie there, half asleep, half afraid, listening to the ripple of words. Tomorrow, the faces at the table may look the same, but you know something has shifted. And yet, the Longhouse is not only a place of fear. It is also where bonds are made, where the dark becomes softer with story. A grandmother's voice can turn the whole house gentle. She speaks of heroes, of animals that talk, of ancestors who walked these same paths. Even those with anger in their hearts grow quiet when a tale rises from the fire. Children press closer, eyes heavy but unwilling to miss a word. In those moments, the Longhouse feels like one body breathing together. Midway through the night, when most are drowsy and the fire is low, a lullaby may carry across the benches. A mother hums to her child, but her voice touches us all. You close your eyes not only to sleep, but to rest inside that sound. In these small ways, the night binds us. If the stories here move you, consider sharing this episode quietly with a friend who loves history. But even stories can carry politics. A tale may remind a listener of a debt unpaid, or of a promise once broken. A storyteller may drop a name, and everyone knows the meaning without it being spoken outright. In the Longhouse, story and power sit side by side. I recall a night when two men argued over land. Voices rose, fists threatened. But then an elder began a tale, about a man who lost everything because he chose anger over reason. The room shifted. The tale was not about the quarrel, yet everyone knew it was. By the end, no blood was spilled. The story itself had acted as judge. Still, not every night ends so peacefully. There are times when fear is sharper. A sudden knock on the door can freeze the whole house. Who comes in the dark? A friend seeking shelter, or an enemy with a blade? You hold your breath until the door opens and you know which it is. Even within, the night can feel unsafe. A neighbor too quick to anger, a relative who cannot be trusted, or the quiet knowledge that wrongs have not been mended. These are the shadows that press closer than the cold. Women carry their own weight of fear. I know what it is to lie awake, listening to heavy steps, wondering if I must protect myself or my child. The Longhouse walls hold no private corners. Safety depends on respect, and when respect breaks, a woman may have no shield but silence, kin, or luck. And yet, the same Longhouse that holds danger also holds the threads of protection. Neighbors who keep watch, friends who sit awake, kin who intervene before violence grows. These are the guardians of our fragile peace. Every act of kindness is also a kind of politics. The man who shares food, the woman who speaks up, the elder who tells the story that stills the quarrel. By dawn, the Longhouse has judged itself. Who was generous, who was selfish, who kept quiet when they should have spoken. These things linger. They decide who will be trusted tomorrow, who will be helped in hunger, and who will stand alone. Night is never neutral. It is the stage where honor, fear, tenderness, and story all play out. In the same breath that tells a fairy tale, the Longhouse may make a promise, or seal a wrong. Both have consequences by dawn. The Longhouse is quiet now. The stories of food, cold, sickness, and danger still hang in the rafters like smoke. And I want to close with a simple truth. If you or I stepped into this world without preparation, we likely would not survive even a single night. That is not an insult to our strength today. It is a reminder of how fragile survival was then, and how extraordinary the women and families who endured it truly were. Let me name the risks once more, so they settle in like the ticking of a clock. The cold. Not the crisp chill of a winter walk with a coat zipped up, but a wet, penetrating cold that crept through wool and skin, through gaps in the thatch, through every threadbare blanket. The disease, coughs that grew deep into the lungs, toothaches that swelled into infections, childbirth pains that could tilt a life in a single night. The cramped sleep, bodies pressed against each other, parasites stirred by warmth, children waking hungry or crying with fever. The malnutrition, stew thinned until it was little more than flavored water, meat that tasted of smoke and salt, hunger gnawing at the edges of thought. The violence, a quarrel that might turn bloody, a drunken guest whose rage was unpredictable, a feud that could follow someone even into the dim light of dawn. Each one of these alone was a challenge. Together, they stacked like stones, heavy and unforgiving. And yet, somehow, people lived. Women nursed children through long nights, neighbors fetched herbs, men sat up by the embers to guard against threats. Survival was never an individual feat, it was always collective. One body alone could not bear it. Networks of care were as necessary as fire and food. I picture a woman, not a legendary queen or a name from saga, but someone ordinary, someone whose life never made it into parchment. She knows how to mend cloaks so that the cold doesn't reach the skin. She knows which herbs can ease a cough, which neighbors might lend a little grain if she asks at the right time, which kin she can trust with her secrets. She carries children through childbirth and watches other women carry her in return. She doesn't live easily, no one does, but she lives. And her survival is not just her own. It shelters her children, her elders, her kin. She is the seam that keeps the household from splitting apart. For us, listening centuries later, it is humbling. We picture Viking life in sagas and films with glowing torches and brave speeches. But the truth is quieter, harder, and in some ways more moving. Heroism was not only in raids or battles. It was in staying awake through a long night with a feverish child. It was in dividing the stew fairly, even when hunger bit your own stomach. It was in walking through the cold to fetch the healer, not knowing if you'd return with help in time. These were the battles most people fought, and they fought them night after night. If you or I were dropped there, unprepared, we would feel our limits quickly. The cold would stiffen our fingers. The smoke would sting our lungs. The stew would leave us unsatisfied. The lice would crawl. The cough in the next bed would fill us with dread. Without the habits and toughness built across a lifetime, without the deep knowledge passed from mother to daughter, we would falter. That recognition should not fill us with shame. It should fill us with respect. Because the women who endured these nights did not have the choice of turning away. They did not get to say, "This is too much for me." They simply faced what was there and shaped life out of it. Their resilience was not optional. It was the ground they stood on. So what do we do with that knowledge now, in our warm rooms, with our soft bedding, with our quick access to medicine and food? We can use it as a lens of empathy. When we read the sagas or hear tales of raids, we remember that behind every fighter were families who survived nights like these. When we admire the beauty of Viking art or the endurance of their voyages, we recall that these achievements rested on countless ordinary lives, held together by quiet, often invisible work. It shifts our perspective. It makes history less about glory, more about humanity. It also softens us toward our own lives. To know that survival once hinged on such fragile balances makes our own comforts glow differently. The hum of the heater, the taste of food that is plentiful, the ease of reaching for medicine. These are privileges built on centuries of struggle. Recognizing that doesn't mean living with guilt. It means living with gratitude, and with a clearer eye for the strengths of people long past. As I close this journey through the Longhouse night, I want to guide you into stillness. Picture the embers again, red fading into gray, their warmth slowly ebbing. Around them, the breathing of sleepers rises and falls. Outside, Frost coats the ground. Inside, someone stirs, adjusts a cloak, listens for a child's breath, then settles again. It is not peaceful in the way we imagine peace. It is layered with worry and weariness, but it is survival, and that is its own kind of peace. Take one slow breath with me now. Inhale gently, hold, and let it go. Another, softer this time. Inhale and exhale. That is how we leave the Longhouse, with the reminder that every ember meant another day survived, another chance to wake and try again. The women who lived these nights are gone, their names forgotten, but their endurance lingers in history. To remember them is to honor them, and to honor them is to remind ourselves that ordinary resilience, even today, carries more weight than we sometimes realize. The fire is low. The Longhouse rests, and so should you.